Luffy is on his own, he usually finds a way to almost get him killed. I mean, wow, how's this guy even gonna become king of the pirates anyway?
Oh dear! Luffy by himself is solid, but an underrated aspect, that nigga gets lost too. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know every member of the Straw Hats, to a degree, are very important. Jokes aside, all of them are actually important, but I think one of the more important Straw Hats, not named Luffy, is easily my glorious king, the pirate hunter Zoro, man. And today, we're gonna see what happens if Zoro just never joined the Straw Hats, which kind of already, like, Frame 1 has the biggest impact, not because he's arguably, in my opinion, is the strongest of the Straw Hats, not named Luffy, of course, but mainly because he's like the first one. So you're taking away the very first guy. He's the first person that Luffy encountered. It already goes south there. Hopefully this leads to a timeline where Ned just says fuck it, right? Probably not, but let's go.
In chapter 5 of One Piece, Zoro officially accepted Luffy's offer to join the crew, and in only 2 years, this partnership would lead him to become two of the strongest fighters in the entire world. But what if Zoro rejected Luffy's offer and never joined the Straw Hat crew? How far would Luffy get on his journey? And before we jump into the changes this would make to the story, let's actually take a quick look at the moment that inspired this whole video, when Luffy first invited Zoro to join the crew. Now at this point, Zoro was tied to a post for saving this little girl here from these bad doggos. Now Luffy then invited him to become the very first crew member, and you might not remember it, but Zoro initially refused. However, then when Luffy recovered his swords and then freed the green moss head from his robes,
you know what's crazy? 90% of the time they refused the first offer. Jinbei didn't really refuse his first offer, he just came back. Nami said no. I mean, said yeah, but then was like lying about it, whatever the fuck. Sanji obviously said no, Chopper said no, Zoro said no, Usopp said no at the time. Damn, I think Brook's the only one that Frame 1 was like, fuck it. Frankie said no, Robin said no, kinda, not like directly. Do you want to be a Straw Hat? No, but like, I think she did actually. Point is, you know the situation I'm talking about. Her shit was fucked up. Point is, damn, these niggas got conviction off rip. Luffy, work on your first approach.
He finally agreed to join the crew. But obviously for this video, let's assume that Zoro actually rejects Luffy a second time, slapping away his invitation like a follow request from a creepy stranger. And if this were the case, Luffy would leave Zoro tied up, which would lead to him actually being executed by the Marines. But honestly, another much more likely scenario here is that Luffy would of course still set Zoro free, because he does know deep down that Zoro is a good guy. And so
yeah, I'm glad he went with this. I didn't know a lot of you guys will interpret this as, oh, Zoro's dead, which would be insanely disappointing, mind you, considering how strong Zoro then becomes, and I don't even know the full strength yet. But you know, it'd be disgustingly disappointing if he died here. It's kind of like, I'm about to nerd out, but I played this game this morning. It's kind of like in Baldur's Gate, right? Like the idea that you can kill some origin characters in the first act, but then knowing the hypothetical power they can get in Act 3 is fucking ridiculous. Yeah, it would have been a definite waste. I'm glad he went with the route of, yeah, Zoro's gonna be alive out there somewhere, maybe even interacts with the Straw Hats one day.
After defeating the Marines, Zoro would thank Luffy, but then simply walk away and pursue his dream of becoming the world's strongest swordsman on his own. And this will have massive consequences in almost every part of the story, because as we will see throughout this video, whenever Luffy is on his own, he usually finds a way to almost get him killed. I mean, wow, how's this guy even gonna become king of the pirates anyways? But now...
Oh dear! I think that Luffy by himself is solid and all that other shit, but an underrated aspect, that nigga gets lost too.
Without Zoro, let's start with Wano Country. Wait, what? Why are we starting so late in the story, you ask? Since the point of this video is to see how far the Straw Hats would get without Zoro, it made sense for me to start at the end and work our way backwards. So we'll be examining each of Zoro's important moments in the story.
By the way, for someone that's watching this video like, oh my god, he's about to get spoiled, this was editor approved. Speaking of editor approved, you know what I approve of? You in the fucking sub button. You see this green screen covering these blinds? It's because I can't fix them. Because I can't afford to fix them. Because you guys aren't subscribing. I fall off. Oh, fuck. Fell off, chat. It's all downhill from here.
story, and then seeing how things would be different without him, because, spoiler alert, the Straw Hats wouldn't have made it that far. And so because we're going in reverse order, there won't be any major storyline changes like in some other what-if scenarios. So before we look at all of Zoro's Legendary's battle later on, let's start early on in the arc. Because during Wano, he did have some minor fights, like against this straw man and in a battle to stop this former daimyo's execution, but in each of these conflicts, there were other Straw Hats present who could easily perform the very same role here. And not even counting the battles, his history as a descendant of Wano never really ended up playing a role in the actual story, so even if he wasn't here during the arc, you could have said that the Straw Hats would just be as motivated to fight Kaido.
I don't even know what that bloodline shit is. I didn't pay too much attention to it. I just saw blue-haired Zoro and was like, the fuck? So I don't even know who that is, man.
Of course, takes us to the climatic battle of Onigashima, and here Zoro was a major participant in the rooftop battle against Big Mom and Kaido, and his presence was definitely felt here. He definitely got in on a few massive attacks and blocked one of the strongest attacks we have seen in the entire story so far, but ultimately, this battle was never really decided either way, so did he really make that big of a difference? However, afterwards, we have
I'll say this, and this kind of goes into where I have the debate with some people, which apparently is a contentious debate, which is at that moment in time, full power Kaido, Gear 5 Luffy, both at 100%, because I think anybody mature enough can realize neither were at 100% who wins. And a lot of people bring up Zoro landing this cut, let alone deflecting attacks and stuff. And I say Zoro definitely did something. I'm not gonna say he didn't do anything. I mean, you literally see Luffy sitting there like, yo, I need 5 minutes, type shit. So yeah, he obviously does something. I'm not gonna be as harsh to it, but in terms of like overall damage, I mean, Kaido's a monster. I'm not even taking a shot at my glorious king. Kaido's just a goddamn demon. Also, he probably is gonna bring up King. Yeah, I don't know. I think their fight is so close. You just have King fly up and do some minor damage. I mean, you gotta think about that one guy that moved Luffy 30 degrees to the left and Kaido bunked his ass to Gear 5. So just imagine if King came up there and tried to cut the nigga or some shit. Yeah, it got bad.
Of course, his truly epic battle against Kaido's right-hand man and the strongest member of the Beast Pirates, King. And while this was an incredibly high battle, there are other characters nearby who probably could have fought King as well in the worst case. In particular, Marco the Phoenix was not doing much at all during this fight, so he could have been a good match to fight the flying dinosaur. Likewise, Luffy could have handled King no problem once he had been done with Kaido, I think. And so even
that's my issue. I don't think it gets to a once he's done thing, you know? Like, let's say there is no Zoro, Sanji's gonna have to either 2v1 it, or Luffy's gonna have to 2v1 it, or Law and Kid are gonna have to 2v2 it. Because Law and Kid are done. They're chopped cheese. They're pickings. Not saying that King is stronger than them, Chattertrons, holy fuck. But use deduction skills. 1 HP Law and Kid on their fucking deathbed just sent Big Mom to the gulag. Probably can't beat the nigga right then and there, especially if he's just fresh running around. So unless Sanji just had way more in the tuck than I'm thinking he did, yeah, this is not a good situation for anybody involved. Not saying that Luffy ain't also stronger than him, but yeah, this nigga just running around there is not good for anybody unless Marco pulls up as he mentioned.
even though Zoro's fight was incredibly epic and we saw him awaken his Conqueror's Haki,
it's a lot of fucking characters I want to know. And half of them were supposed to be dead and didn't die. Half of them are also running around. You know what? Never mind, man. I like Wano. I know that sounded crazy.
Disappointing as it may sound, the Straw Hats ultimately probably would have been fine in Wano even without Zoro. But I can promise you that this will not be the case for many of the arcs later on in the story. Or
it's an argument for Wano. I'll at least, like, if this was a live conversation with them, we'd have a debate conversation about it. I'm more on the 55% chance that they cooked. I just see what he's saying. Someone might have done it, could have done it, possibly would have done it. But I'm actually gonna say without that nigga, considering how close all the fights were, hey man, you losing arguably, well, not arguably, you using like a top 5 fighter there. That's a toughie. that is certainly a toughie there to then say you're gonna beat the ops and you losing one of the 5 biggest assets you got.
I guess earlier on in the story. However, since Zoro wasn't in Whole Cake Island at all, we'll just move on ahead to Zoe. And on the back of this giant elephant, Zoro's fighting abilities weren't really needed again. However, he did demonstrate one of his super important roles on the crew, which is his leadership. Because when Sanji left to take care of his family problems, Zoro told the rest of the crew that Sanji better well apologize for his actions. He left the crew at a super important time in the story, plus he was going to stir up trouble with a second emperor. And Zoro's role here is important because he is the only one who will really step up and demand respect for the crew and their captain. And while this tense moment didn't result in any major conflict, yet at least, it was a great reminder for Luffy about the honor and respect needed on the crew. However,
yeah, this is why Zoro is my glorious king. Not saying he's the best at speeches at all, and especially in the whole genre of anime. Some of you would say he is, which is fine. You know, you got your straw hat on. But I definitely think that why I fucks with Zoro more than just I like swords, LOL. Now I think about it, I think he's the only character in anime that is like sword style guy that I stand outside of like shows that are built around it. Point is, Zoro is like the not dad of the Straw Hats, maybe the drunken uncle. Probably the drunken uncle, but he's definitely like the somehow mature guy. And not only is he somehow the mature guy, but he also is like a fantastic foil for Luffy, who can come at things with a lot of inexperience or just, I mean, he's fucking Luffy. He's not the wisest crayon, you know what I'm saying? So Zoro being there just works for me 90% of the time. There's some moments where, he's lost again. That gimmick, I hit or miss. But that's why I fuck with him. Not only does he do cool shit, but he also has probably some of the more interesting dialogue amongst the Straw Hats. He has the rivalry with Zoro. He has the nuggets of leadership with Luffy. He talks about being courageous and other stuff with the cowards of the Straw Hat, whether it's like Usopp or Nami. You know what I mean when I say cowards. He has the he has a lot of those things going on. And before you niggas, because I think TSO talk, 2-minute TSO talk. The Bork niggas are the loudest, but the Straw Hat niggas are the most sensitive. You know what I mean? But no, dead ass though, I think that Usopp and Nami aren't exactly cowards in the sense of, you know, they stand for the Straw Hats, but you know what they be on, bro. And Zoro be like, nah, man up, pussy.
Even if Zoro wasn't here to give that reminder, I do not think that it would have changed Luffy's actions much in Whole Cake Island anyways. However, that is definitely not the case for another important moment coming up in the crew later on. You might know what I'm talking about. But 3 arcs down and the Straw Hats would have been just fine in each one so far. Interesting. Maybe one day if Zoro's sense of direction really got him lost, the crew might actually just be fine. However,
the issue is they don't get there. I know he's building that up. He kind of like me. I understand instant payoff probably works better for YouTube, but he's building up the fantastic display of, sure, if you want to boost him to this point in time, yeah, I guess they could make it past this and this and this because he wasn't even fucking there. Or all he did was give advice, and maybe Luffy learns this on his own or from Rayleigh or some shit. But no. I'm with him. There are certain timelines. I mean, there's certain arcs where there's just no way in fuck they get out of there.
This brings us all the way to Dressrosa, where Zoro fought and defeated this giant stoneman. However, this is another enemy who isn't really all that powerful. I mean, how could he be with a voice
like that?
So someone like Law, Sabo, or even Luffy again could have probably defeated Pika almost instantly and just fine if there had been need for it. And so moving back even further, Zoro does have this very nice moment in Punk Hazard where he yells at Luffy that he should finally take things seriously after he almost dies at the hands of this gas.
Correct.
He reminds Luffy that they are
this is like one of my favorite moments between Luffy and Zoro. Not top 5 or nothing like that, but Zoro telling Luffy post time skip, hey gang, it's been 2 years. Get your shit together. Yeah, it works with me. It works for me, bruh.
Out in the most dangerous part of the world. And of course, Luffy laughs it off, so maybe it wouldn't matter even if Zoro was here to remind his captain not to mess around too much. Zoro also defeated this snowbird lady, but someone else could have easily taken her out as well, if we're being honest. Which is now already bringing us all the way back to the time skip. So
I might challenge that. Off guard in that scenario? Who was there? Was Sanji there? Damn. One Piece is so fucking long, I forget all the shit there. I know Chopper was there, but he was dealing with the tots. Not only was there, was Sanji there? I think he was. Point is, who?
As you can see, Zoros' influence in the
Sanji was there, then
post-time skip
obviously,
arc
but
so
not
far
that.
was actually
Oh,
not
but Sanji wouldn't kick her, so that doesn't fucking matter. Damn, who? Yeah, I'd actually like to see who would deal with that. Because Luffy's stupid.
as important as you might have previously thought. And that's because even though Zoro has a fight in basically every arc after the time skip, the crew is not as challenged like they were pre-time skip, at least not yet. That is already changing, as we know. Plus, on top of that, everyone else in the crew is now fairly strong as well, so Zoro isn't the only one that's able to fight strong fighters now. But things are going to be very different the further back we go in the story. Now, of course,
this shit about to get bad, chat.
Zoro doesn't play any role in the events leading up to Marineford because the Straw Hats aren't here, and even though the Straw Hats were defeated on Sabaody, Zoro's absence probably wouldn't have really had any major effect on the outcome anyways. And so where it's starting to get really interesting is when we travel back and discuss the Nightmare Island Thriller Bark, where Zoro has...
This is the biggest dick suck of hell that you can take the Straw Hats, and without Zoro here... Oh boy!
His most badass moment in the entire story, and
but nothing
it's not
happened.
only Zoro's
But nothing happened though, so fair enough.
Most badass moment, it's probably the most badass one. In his very first fight of the arc, Zoro defeats his ancestor, which is this zombie swordsman, but I definitely think that Nightmare Luffy could have probably also defeated the samurai. However, the even greater conflict came at the end of the arc when Zoro stood up to the warlord Kuma to save Luffy, and in exchange for Luffy's life, Zoro agreed to take on all of his captain's pain from the previous battle. This of course resulted in the world famous nothing happened scene, which is personally my favorite in the entire story. However, with Zoro not in the crew, it would have probably fallen to Sanji to take,
and Sanji would have died, probably. And if Sanji dies, maybe that still earns like Kuma's respect or whatever, but now you lose Sanji, and if you lose Sanji, woo-wee!
on his captain's pain. I mean,
no Zoro, no Sanji is devious.
Sanji actually wanted to do this anyways, but Zoro knocked him aside. So in this case, Sanji takes on all of the pain, and we seriously have to ask if he would have been able to survive this just like Zoro did. And I mean, I love Sanji as much as the next man, and so please don't hate me if you're more Sanji than Zoro, but I honestly do think that the answer would likely be no. Zoro is shown all throughout the story to have crazy endurance and the ability to fight through pain. And so even though we've recently learned more about Sanji's incredible body, it was not awakened at that point in the story, so I don't think that he would have been able to survive this crazy amount of damage.
Yeah, that's not Sanji hate, Sanji stands. I understand they are rivals. They are always somewhat relative. And Zoro, you may think Sanji kicks harder than Zoro swipes. For your fucking sake, if that's what you need, go for it. Endurance, Zoro got that shit outside of fucking Whole Cake plus Luffy. I thought Zoro had endurance in the bag and then Whole Cake Luffy happened, but that's the fucking point. That nigga got that stat specifically. I'm not saying Sanji hasn't taken a hit, but no, dog. I just can't see Sanji tanking that attack. I appreciate the willingness. I cannot see him doing it. And at that point, you are telling me that the Straw Hats get through really any fucking arc without Sanji and Zoro, and an arc where either of them were there. Ooh-wee.
And so, apologies, Sanji, but it does look like you probably needed your moss-headed friend after all. But since we're now getting to the points in the story where Zoro is absolutely necessary, I do want to add one major disclaimer, because even though there will be a bunch of points where Luffy would fail without Zoro, we can usually find some sort of reasons for the Straw Hats to be able to continue. For example, in this situation with Kuma, it is possible that the warlord takes mercy on them because he is friends with Luffy's father after all. While we can usually find some sort of excuse like that, there are gonna be some arcs that are just impossible to move on from without Zoro, again, very early on in the story.
Yeah, you have to do this because there's always a person in these kind of videos, And you know, to that person, you do whatever the hell you need to do to live your life happily. And if that's defending every single, not even criticism, but every single non-dick suck of the Straw Hats or Dragon Ball or Naruto, kudos to you. But for fans that can appreciate the anime and admit when things will either go awry or even possibly be critical of the show, yeah, gang, these niggas have certain defeats. These niggas have certain defeats.
Which now brings us to the government's judicial islands Enies Lobby. And during this arc, we see one of the 3 major characteristics that Zoro actually brings to the crew. 2 of these we will be discussing in upcoming arcs very soon, but the first characteristic that I want to focus on is that he's just a straight out badass fighter. At this point in the story, he, Luffy, and Sanji are the only 3 strong ones who can really fight in the crew. No offense to Nami and Robin quite yet, and Chopper does lose his mind when he goes berserk at this point. So Zoro's absence here is a major problem when Luffy is somehow distracted or taken out here because there's just no one left to protect the others. And honestly, if you look back, this situation happens in basically every single arc, but maybe that just means that Luffy would take things more seriously so he doesn't put the rest of the crew in danger. But then again, kind of doubt it. So let's keep this in mind as we shift back to Zoro's fight against this sword-wielding giraffe. Now Zoro eventually wins this battle and claims the key number 5, which is the exact key needed to free Robin from her handcuffs. So
I forgot. See, but that's what I was talking about. That's exactly the type of shit I'm talking about. So it got cut out because I couldn't get my thoughts together earlier, or it didn't get cut out and my editors are laughing at me. But that's where I was trying to go with, where I'm like, okay, at some point, the Straw Hats have an undeniable defeat here. But I don't remember all the fucking details because it's been 1,000 episodes. About to be 1,100. So I forgot that is the key. I forgot that's the key. I know he fought the dude and Sniper King's on his arm, but I forgot he also had the key. So now you're telling me that it essentially had to have, it would have to be Sanji in that situation. After, is this the one where Nami had to save Cuz too? Yes, it is. So Nami had to save Sanji, but Sanji's all sudsed up or whatever the fuck. Oh my God, they're cooked. It just hit me. They would have to get lucky that they could stall them. Because time is of the essence there, because Robin was getting escorted, and if she went through that thing, GG's. So any amount of time wasted on Sanji getting his body back is GG's. Did he have his body back at 100% by that point? But he was already kind of beaten and battered, and now he had to take on Giraffe Boy and the other. Yeah, GG's, nigga. Yeah, no, I don't see it. I'm not even, this isn't a Sanji hate video. We're definitely going to do what would happen if Sanji wasn't there, because I feel like that's next in line considering you guys, or Nami and then Sanji. Either way, we'll definitely do a Sanji version of this before niggas think I don't like Sanji. But I think that, yeah, no, because he got fucked up and then turned into like a pillow pet, a sudsy pillow pet. So now this beaten, battered, sudsy pillow pet maybe turned back into regular Sanji. He has to then 2v1 and get the key delivered all in the same time span that it took Zoro to just defeat the motherfuckers. That's a tough one. Sanji was in that room, to be fair, I think. I still don't see that going down like that, especially now that Zoro isn't there. I almost lost track of the fucking video. Zoro wouldn't be there. God damn it.
Without Zoro winning this fight, Robin would have been trapped for good. However, I do think that someone else like Luffy or Sanji could possibly have defeated the Giraffe Man as well. But so in the end, Robin might still somehow go free even without Zoro if he really wanted to. However, moving back to Water 7, we get another critical example of how without Zoro's presence as the unofficial vice captain, the crew would surely been falling apart. So you will remember that the crew reached Water 7 in need of a new ship. This of course sparks the fierce duel between
chop cheese
between Usopp and Luffy, which results in Usopp leaving the crew for a while. And this is an incredibly important moment for the crew's long-term future. That's because if Luffy gave into Usopp's demands, it would have shown the crew that Luffy is not a strong leader and captain and is not really worthy of their loyalty. However, in another really famous scene in chapter 333, Zoro will not let Luffy take the easy route, and he reminds Luffy that making these difficult choices are gonna be the burden of of being the captain. And so without Zoro in this moment, Luffy may very well have chosen to keep Usopp's friendship rather than do what was best for the crew. And if Luffy let Usopp rejoin the crew right away or agreed to keep using their ship, it would probably have had disastrous consequences later on in the story. For example, if they did keep using the Mary, it could have sunk in the middle of the ocean without anywhere to escape to. Or if Luffy didn't earn the respect of the crew in this scene, they may not always listen to his orders later on. And so this lack of respect and leadership could eventually lead to a tragic breakup during some future conflict. And so here we have our first true example of Zoro's importance to the overall stability of the crew. Because
that's crazy how that, like, I ain't gonna cap. I may have mentioned it earlier, but then it just poofed out of my mind again. No, this is why, again, I was talking about Zoro's speeches earlier. I don't know how the fuck that slipped my mind just now. But I don't think he's dragging this at all. This is GG's. If Luffy doesn't do this, one of two things go down. As he said, either they are taking this 1 HP Mary out there, and gang, that's just a matter of when your ship sinks, not if. Or they're out here just not having as much conviction in Luffy as they do now. And as we've seen, it's the absurd amount of loyalty the Straw Hats have later on that allow for a lot of pivotal moments and shit to go down. Where if you don't have that, maybe Nami tucks tail if she's about to get cooked one time. Maybe Usopp does the exact same thing. Maybe Sanji says, you know what? You can kill him, who cares? Just like shit. Obviously, it wouldn't get that dark, but but that's the fucking point.
Don't think that anyone else on the crew is as serious and as devoted to respect to have the very same level of impact as Vice Captain. I mean, Sanji is kind of wishy-washy, Usopp has his moments but is too weak physically, and Nami would rather avoid these kinds of serious issues within the crew. And besides his fighting and his leadership qualities, there is an even more important third characteristic that no one else on the crew possesses.
He gets lost.
Because out of all the Straw Hats, Zoro is the one most single-mindedly focused on his goal to become the world's greatest swordsman. And out of all other Straw Hats, it is probably the pretty much easiest goal to understand. Probably sounds a little bit something like this in Zoro's mind. Step 1, get stronger. Step 2, defeat enemies. Step 3, question mark 4, profits. Simple, right? But Zoro is also the only one that we consistently see training to actually reach his goals. He's frequently lifting ultra heavy weights or practicing his sword skills, and I do like to think that this has some effect on the crew as well. And so we do have to wonder if losing Zoro would make the crew less dedicated towards their own goals. I think Luffy at least would of course still want to become Pirate King, but
yeah, that's interesting. I will give credit where it's due for the other characters. I'm not saying Zoro doesn't influence them at all, but a lot of them are, as I said earlier, when they're even being recruited, they have their convictions. I don't think he affects Sanji's dreams at all, respectfully. I think Sanji is more than good with himself and what he wants to do in his life and shit like that. I think Nami, similar, but maybe seeing that it's not 2 but 3 people that have to defend her all the time, and Zoro's always bandaged up and beat the fuck up on the ship, that she'll take that shit less seriously if it was just Sanji's goon ass and Luffy. Maybe you could argue, well, if Sanji is really beat up, she would take it seriously, maybe even more because yap. But I think I'll give credit there in terms of like the climate attack and stuff. Usopp's always gonna invent shit, so I think he's fine as well. So I'm not saying I fully disagree with him or that Zoro doesn't influence people, but they all pretty much, as I said earlier in the video, at least how I perceive it, all the Straw Hats have their morals and beliefs, and I think it's not like Zoro gives it a crazy Zenkai. It's a boost, but it's not that crazy of a boost to where I feel like nobody just gives a fuck about their dreams if he's not there.
Just a moment, Zoro was truly irreplaceable in the early parts of the story. Also, if Zoro's not there to butt heads with Sanji, then the cook's pervertedness might have reached even more ridiculous heights, and who knows, Nami could even kill Sanji herself if he peeps in on her bath one too many times. But now on to Skypia, where Zoro plays a key role in the outcome of the arc. His major action here was when he defeated the winged puppy lover. And while there was no one else around to really take this guy out, I can imagine Luffy defeating him pretty easily once he got out of the snake. And after this one, none of the surviving characters can actually defeat the lightning god Enel, so Zoro basically takes a nap until he helps cut down the giant beanstalk. As a result, without Zoro, it is possible that the beanstalk never gets cut down, which means that Luffy would have never reached Enel in time to deliver the final blow. But I do think that between this warrior's dedication and Nami's cleverness, they would have probably been able to find some way to get Luffy to Enel, but again,
you see, he doing it. Hey, you see, this is the second arc in a row, bro, you ain't gotta do that shit. They would have died. I forgot that detail. I'm not gonna sit there and cap. I definitely forgot that detail. That's why I need to do more of these One Piece videos so I can become as like fluent with the story as Dragon Ball and Naruto. It's gonna take some time, but I want to remember all the shit, right? And I forgot that Zoro cuts that beanstalk, and that's how we get to that. That is not that. I don't play Street Fighter. Point is, look, man, you ain't gotta lie for these YouTube niggas. They gonna comment what they want to comment regardless. Gang, if Zoro ain't there and that beanstalk don't fall the way it did, they die. They get cooked, but he fucks off with the bell. Whatever you want to hear, they lose.
Maybe not. Which now brings us to Alabasta and the juicy bits of this video. Now, Zoro's main role in this arc is to take—
I need a refresher here. I think that Zoro can't leave that guy alone, but then at the same time, Luffy would just fight Crocodile anyway, so maybe this is a situation of like how it was in part 2.
Down the Warlord Crocodile's right-hand man, Mr. One. And originally, this was a huge moment of growth for Zoro as he finally learned how to cut steel. Kind of crazy, actually, that he couldn't even do that up until that point in the story because we've really gotten used to it. However, with
niggas bench pressing, niggas casually curling like 5-ton cars but can't cut steel. Man, kiss my ass.
Zoro out of the picture, someone else will need to step up to this insane blade man from tearing through the crew. Certainly, I think Luffy could eventually figure out a way to beat Mr. One, even though Luffy and Sharp Things don't really get along that well, especially at that point in the story.
It'd be a
but
bloody
Luffy
victory.
already had his hands full with Crocodile, so someone else would have needed to take out Mr. One, or at least distract Crocman or Mom, while Luffy takes out—
It would be a bloody victory, pun intended, because he literally uses blood to fucking fight Crocodile. But if he couldn't, no, gang, I'm not gonna lie, this about to sound like another fries in the bag moment, because Luffy might survive. The Straw Hats are getting fucked.
Mr. Blades, and I do think that their best chance is a combination of Sanji and Nami, where Sanji could keep Mr. One busy while Nami figures out how to strike him with lightning, but honestly, it sounds kind of questionable, and I do think this is a serious candidate for a place where the Straw Hats might fail without Zoro. But that's not the only critical role that Zoro plays here. He's also part of the team that helps Vivi reach the bomb, and so without Zoro there to fling Chopper and Vivi into the sky, they would have had to come up with another plan to reach the top. I mean, perhaps Usopp could quickly make some sort of giant—
You know what? And that's fine with me, man. And that's fine with me. We don't need the stop fighting. You know how much better life would be without— Stop fighting! Stop fighting! Oh my God! I forgot to tell you to stop fighting! Just let Chopper and Vivi fall.
slingshot, or another option is that the Marine Captain Smoker could help by using his smoke logia powers to get them up there to the bomb, but again, with no Zoro there, things look very dark. And you might fairly enough be asking, why would Smoker out of all people be willing to help them here? But I don't think that the Marine Captain would stand just around if he knew that millions would be able to die from a—
That's my take. Luffy lives, this country is cooked.
giant bomb. Plus, these are desperate times without our favorite swordsman, so we've gotta get a little bit creative here to get the Straw Hats past this hurdle. And so after Luffy defeats Crocodile, the Straw Hats get their next major bounties, and without Zoro to take much of the credit, the rest of the Straw Hats probably will get a pretty decent bump in each of their bounties, which is great news for Sanji, Usopp, and maybe even Chopper finally gets some of the respect that he deserves here. Now, let's jump out of the desert and continue moving backwards even more into even more critical territory here. Certainly, the Straw Hats would be just fine in Little Garden and Drum Island, since Zoro basically just got stuck in wax and then decided to have a little wintertime workout in the snow. However, that brings us to the booze lover's favorite island, Whiskey Peak. Because here the Straw Hats were tricked into passing out drunk, and then the entire island tried to capture them to earn their bounty money. However, Zoro was sober enough to fight all of them off until Luffy and the others were waking up. And so while Zoro did do a lot of work here, none of these enemies were super powerful, so maybe Luffy and the others would have eventually gotten free no matter what, but again, maybe not. Might be hard to believe, but over 900 chapters in reverse, and we've only had one real moment so far where Zoro's absence could have led to an eventual breakup and failure of the crew, and a few others that required fairly creative solutions for the crew to advance. However,
Nah, you being way too nice, dog. They're cooked, and that's okay.
No absolute crushing defeats yet. And so next up is the East Blue, the weakest of all the seas, and so it should be a walk in the park for the Straw Hats, right? Right? Well, let's just see how they can survive Arlong Park. Here, the Straw Hats will again be missing Zoro's fierce loyalty to the crew, because in chapter 71, Zoro confronts Nami in front of this gang of fishermen. And here, Nami is still pretending that she doesn't care about the crew, but Zoro does not believe her, like, at all. In fact, to prove that she still belongs with the crew, he throws himself into the water. Now, this forces Nami to choose to let him drown or save him herself.
Who's
now, of course,
doing that?
Nami does end up saving him, proving to both
the bond of the Straw Hats isn't all the way there, so it's not just like Nami loves me, she'd save me, right? But it's also kind of like, bro, you're fucking lying. So who has the cojones to do this? Maybe Usopp. In terms of, because Usopp's a coward for like fighting and stuff, but like maybe Usopp in this situation is like calling bullshit. Sanji might do it. I don't know.
Zoro and Nami that she very much cares about the crew and Luffy. And so without Zoro here, this entire arc could play out completely different.
That's a question
Nami
mark.
may not be as convinced about her
Luffy
true
can't
feelings
do
for
it.
the Straw Hats, or at least
Well, Luffy would do it though. God fucking I take it back. Luffy would risk his life. Luffy would sit there and be like, fuck it.
it may take way longer for her to finally break down and accept help, but beyond the emotional stakes, Zoro also played a significant role in the fights in Arlong Park. Because even though he was still severely injured from his early battles with Mihawk, more on that very soon, no worries, he fought off this sword-wielding octopus and even kept the fishman's captain Arlong busy when Luffy was trapped underwater. In other words, without Zoro, someone else like Sanji would have needed to step in to fight Arlong until Luffy was rescued, and this presents all types of major problems and challenges, since Sanji was the one who ended up having to break the rock that Luffy was trapped in. So either
Sanji has to fight an underground fish, octopus 8-sword style guy, and stall Arlong. This is kind of what the pattern has been with all those hypotheticals earlier, and that's why I was like, yo, I promise y'all don't hate Sanji. Y'all are just asking this nigga to be Luffy plus Zoro plus Sanji in this timeline. Why is he not the fucking captain if he can do all of this shit? God damn.
Someone else would have to keep Arlong busy. Sorry, Usopp, I guess. Or someone else would have needed to free Luffy, but I truly don't know who else would have been strong enough to do that. And so once again, this is our first clear example where Luffy would have very easily died if Zoro would have never joined. And so it's really a stretch of the imagination to say that Sanji does fight off Arlong long enough for Luffy to be freed by Usopp, who then heroically blasts the rock off Luffy's legs with a cannon. And so with Luffy free, he can then defeat Arlong and rescue Nami's village.
But then the nigga tried to stop.
That's a real big stretch here.
Fuck no, because it was obviously Sanji had to break the stone shit down there. He had to fight off the fish down. Fuck no, that doesn't happen. No, stop being nice to people. I like this guy. I'm gonna give him a like before y'all think I hate him. But no, they're cooked, and that's okay.
So maybe another narrow escape, but the same cannot be said of Baratie, where there is literally nothing that the Straw Hats can do on their own to survive. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here, because first, it is possible that they will never find Sanji's floating restaurant at all, because in chapter 42, the Straw Hats' new ship is attacked by everyone's favorite bounty hunter, Johnny and Yosaku. Luffy is ready to kick them off the ship, but then Zoro recognizes Johnny, and they quickly become friends and get directions to the Baratie. However,
got that wrong. They were friends.
If Zoro was not on board, Luffy might have just thrown him overboard, and this could lead to them never finding a Baratie. So with no Zoro, probably no Sanji. However, let's say there are some possibilities that could still lead them to Sanji. For example, Luffy might still want to recruit one of these bounty hunting bros since he still needs strong fighters, or even if he doesn't, they could still hear about the Baratie from someone else on another island. So let's just assume that they end up finding the Baratie
just
somehow,
yeah,
where they 100% will be completely annihilated without Zoro. Here, after destroying part of the restaurant, Luffy is forced to work as a chore boy to pay off the damage. That is until this pirate Commodore eventually shows up and starts shooting up the place. And Zoro's role in this fight is basically zero. However, when the world's strongest swordsman Mihawk makes his appearance, things completely change. You see, originally Mihawk came to the Baratie intent on taking down this very same pirate who was now attacking the restaurant. And after Mihawk easily cuts their giant ship in half, Zoro steps up to challenge the warlords. And even though Zoro is utterly defeated here, Mihawk is so impressed by Zoro's honor as a swordsman and his loyalty to Luffy that he does decide to leave everyone else alone. And this scene—
yeah, he literally respects Zoro so much, he's like, you stand him, I respect you too, little nigga, and then says fuck off. But if that doesn't happen, Luffy, I'm gonna deck you in the end, my arms are gone.
It perfectly shows off something only Zoro can bring to the crew. He is fiercely honorable. While Luffy, Nami, and Usopp will use every trick in the book to defeat an enemy, Zoro will face an opponent head-on in an honorable duel. He's also intensely loyal to the crew, so much so that he places Luffy's dreams and life ahead of his own. And it is these very traits that so inspire Mihawk to let everyone else live. And so without Zoro in the crew, there is no telling what Mihawk might have been doing to the Straw Hats. Would he still be satisfied just taking this guy's head? Maybe. Or would he probably not want to continue to eliminate all of the other pirates at the restaurant? And if Mihawk were to come after Luffy, then our rubber man has absolutely no chance whatsoever against the world's strongest swordsman at this point. So the Straw Hats' fate would very entirely be out of their hands. Again, stretching things really far, let's maybe say that Mihawk is feeling generous, or maybe the head chef Zeph convinces him to spare Luffy because he still needs to work off his debt. Or maybe, just be honest, this introvert might just want to return to his dark castle. But without Zoro, this would definitely be a time that the Straw Hats could have been easily wiped out. And that is even more true in the arc before this one, Syrup Village. So let's back up to chapter 23 with Luffy, Zoro, and Nami sailing to Usopp's—
you know, I forgot about this shit.
home island. And now that Nami is steering the ship, the risk of death at sea is basically zero, so the trio travels to Syrup Village where they meet the boy who cried wolf, Usopp. And Zoro's role in this arc is minimal until the final battle where he fights these felon brothers. And at this point in the fight, Luffy was—
reaction, man. Yo, this is why I like when y'all be on my dick about not remembering every detail. Y'all gotta understand, I've only seen every episode of One Piece once outside of like major climactic shit that I'm like, all right, let me see how this was in sub or whatever the case may be. Point is, I've watched everything with you all. So it's like, damn, I ain't seen this in maybe a year.
Hypnotized and asleep. So unless Nami woke him up, they would all have been in serious trouble. So it is entirely possible that the crew is taken out completely because Luffy was tricked into a situation where he cannot help himself or the crew. Wow, I mean, these guys really need Zoro. But of course, we could imagine that somehow they make it out alive again. Maybe Luffy just never gets put to sleep, or that Nami is able to wake him up earlier. Maybe Usopp shoots him with some smelling salts.
No!
Speaking of which, wow, these—
they lose. Thank you.
things are powerful. But with this one, I really don't think that they would have been able to survive at all. I mean, without Zoro, Luffy is literally the only strong fighter, so once again, the Straw Hat journey here is at its end without Zoro. But we can even take it another step back to Orange Town and see how Luffy would do in the very first arc without Zoro. It's in this small village that Luffy first meets Nami, and since Zoro isn't even on the island yet, Luffy is still captured by Buggy the Clown, so Luffy is locked in a cage and he is about about to be blasted by Buggy's special cannonballs. However, in chapter 11, he is saved when Zoro fights off Buggy and then flips the cannon away from Luffy. Zoro then carries Luffy's cage away from Buggy and into the town. And so with no Zoro there, Luffy is completely helpless. Nami already tried to save him, but she was no match against Buggy's crew. So unless Luffy was able to somehow chew his way out of this cage, his pirate adventure is over after just a single island without Zoro. So now you know why we did it in reverse. But while Luffy's journey without Zoro is basically over after just a single island, that means that the other Straw Hats never get to pursue their dreams as part of the crew. And this brings us to an even more interesting question. Because what would have happened to everyone else in the story, including Zoro, if Luffy had never been born at all? And if you want to...
Damn, that's an interesting timeline as well. Fuck it, make the what if, man. Do it, no balls. But yeah, I think it's obvious though. Everyone knows you only going so far. The question is, where do you end? Without really all of the Straw Hats, maybe you can be an asshole and argue like Jinbei at the absolute latest point in the series. Oh, maybe they get back. A dick. Every Straw Hat matters, obviously. Even Usopp and especially my glorious king. Take care, stay blessed. I'm gonna see y'all next time. If you guys would like One Piece videos like this, leave your thoughts. I'm out of here, man. It's like 11 in the morning, so if I was butchering anything, 11 in the morning for me is like 2 hours of sleep. I got problems.